Right.
But one of the question I had, because Malcolm talked about, you know, finding their roots.
Great winged
And
sea
everybody
creature
wants.
spoke your silhouette, and I'll never forget. Dragging behind you black clouds of rain, precipitating torrential pain, escaping your own persecution with lessons on how to persecute. Your destiny manifested as we surrendered our identity, our history, our culture, spiritual beliefs and traditions. The land we held sacred, for it sustains us all, cannot be bought or sold. Yeah, the same land that you stole. However, not to worry, ancestors, for we have bore young that are going to steal back the sun.
Slaves are freed, and then they promised them 40 acres and a mule.
Right.
So yeah, and then they promised the Indians their land according to the treaty. So in certain areas, you have Shoshones and Comanches had made agreements with the government of the United States.
Right.
You had the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo made agreements that they would keep control of their land and their assets. And then you have the agreement that to give something repatriation to the blacks, which never happened. And so amongst all those, as well as the colonizers or the settlers that came here, all of those things just makes for a confusing issue about identity. But the main thing that I would like us as Americans to do is to recognize that because Indian people have been here so long, that we're not gone. We're not a vanishing race, as that one book said. Remember that book, The Vanishing Race?
Right, right.
That we're not vanishing. And then probably, I've heard that blacks have a large percentage of them have Indian roots. And sorry about that.
No, that's all right.
They have Indian roots. So then, but the American Indian that has bought into the accreditation, the stamp of approval by the United States government in the White House or the Capitol in D.C., they're always going there to ask for permission to recognize us as Indians, to recognize this treaty. When they're very shifty in making these treaties, the agreements are so, it just makes for a confusing identity. So I want us as Indian people to start bringing in people and saying, you know what, if you guys say you're Indian, you are Indian. We need more people that are Indian. And we need to form a greater population so we can have allies, so we can elect the Indian president. That kind of vision needs to happen. And so with this history that we've been bought into, everybody's looking to the white guy for accreditation. The blacks don't look to the Chicanos don't look to the blacks, and then the Indian don't look to the Chicano or the black, and then we're all looking to the white guy. We're stuck there, aren't we?
You know, what it comes down to historically, if you just take a cursory look at history, you know, it's divide and conquer. Right off the bat, divide and conquer. You know, the white, and you know, I don't like the word settler. I don't think it's a legitimate word. I think it's a fraudulent term. Settler means, well, come here and settle things down. They were invaders. They invaded the land. They were aggressive. They were mean-spirited. They were vicious. They were murderous. And so they learned that dividing and conquering, to conquer, you had to divide. So, you know, the different groups here, and look for ways to get them to fight each other. And the second thing is, you know, the golden rule, you know. He who steals the gold makes the rules. And our country, my country, technically speaking, I'm a citizen of the United States, is the most expert at divide and conquer and making the rules because they got the gold. So they passed laws to terminate the Indians in the 50s. They passed laws to this and to that and to the other. And then there we go buying into those laws, and you know, separation of the races and blah blah blah, and the reservations. But I mean that begins to break down when a people as a whole, you know, begin to look to return to the source. You know, it was Amilcar Cabral, the African, I think from Mozambique, wrote this brilliant book in the late 60s called Return to the Source, and explains to us, and we're getting active, and we're discovering our identity, and we're understanding our connection to the land and to the people. And we read this book, Return to the Source. By the way, the Portuguese assassinated him with the help of of the U.S. government, but of the CIA. But we read it, and the basic message was for our people to gain their liberation, they have to return to the source and uncover their identity, define their identity, and that's what happened to both, you know, to the black rebellions, to the Indian rebellions of the late 60s, early 70s, and the Chicano rebellion, saying, you know, wow, we understand now. We're not, quote, Americans. We're not Anglos. We're not a melting pot. We're a quilt where we still have the basis for our identity and our integrity. So when the Indians take Alcatraz and Chicanos march across the fields of Texas, and the blacks sitting in the deep south in restaurants and hit the streets, and I mean we that generation got to be the luckiest generation of the last 300 years of this country, because it woke up people in a very short time. It woke us up, and then the white kids were saying, wow, look what we've done, the ones that were honest and analytical. Look what we've done to Indian people. It's amazing culture, this amazing history that lived in harmony with the earth and the animals. And look what we've done to the farm workers and the Mexicans, and used them as tools. When we didn't need them, throw them back. First of all, rip off half of Mexico by cooking up a lie to invade, and then to enslave black people when they couldn't enslave. A lot of people ask me, well, why didn't they enslave Indian people? Because the Indian people, this was their land, and they were too wise and too clever. They knew the terrain, they knew their identity. They couldn't enslave them, so they had to wipe them out, annihilate them. Like Hillary Clinton said something like, obliterate Iran. They obliterated. And then brought in African slaves, and they were so analytical that never did they buy two slaves from the same region that speak the same language. So they separated them, and they couldn't even look at the other black person enslaved in the stinking shacks and be able to communicate. That's what they tried to do that with the Indian people, but they couldn't do it, so they put them in reservations. And anytime they discovered any value to the land, we learned all that. We learned all that without the educational system telling it to us. We had to find that information from our elders, by asking questions, by reading alternative sources, and by figuring out for ourselves, like, who am I? I mean, I really didn't know whether I was a Mexican American, a Spanish surnamed American, a Mexican. I mean, they had us all completely confused, and then we finally said, you know what, we're Chicanos. We're not Mexican citizens. We're not, North American citizens in the full sense of the word. We're Chicanos. Once we realized that we were Chicanos, the rest is history. And some of us still insist that we're Chicanos, but they've tried to erase our identity again by calling us Hispanic, which is a term that simply means Spaniard from Spain. They want to make us white so that we, reject Indian people, that we reject black people, we reject Asian people, and we feel a little bit more, fuller human being because, quote, we're Hispanic. That's just an effort, the same thing they did, Spanish surnamed American. It's a hyphenated, weakened, absurd, fraudulent scam on our people. And some of our people buy it. Oh, I'm Hispanic. Oh, my God. Have you heard of the history of our people? Have you heard of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that settled the war between Mexico and the United States, and was violated before the ink was dried, just like they violated 371 Indian treaties? Have you heard about that? And you still want to call yourself Hispanic? Come on, be serious. I mean, don't buy into it. So, I mean, that's really the bottom line. It's a question of identity.
So that's identity theft right there, huh?
Identity theft. Full blown.